Okay, here we are. Welcome to today's show, and our first guest, or only first guest, our only guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I will do indeed. Thanks, Matt. My name is Jo, and I have a background in recruitment and HR, but I have my own company now called Culture Code. So I help companies to create great workplace cultures, which is a good for this show. I think it kind of fits in. It's all about helping create the right environment for success. So for people to do their best work. So it's about I work with leaders and with teams of people to create really strong cultural foundations and make sure that everybody's aligned to that and living and breathing that, and then everyone being set up and supported to perform to their potential and make the most of their talent, which all sounds really easy. And of course, we all know it isn't easy at all to do that. But yeah, that's what I do.
Great, thank you.
And try and do.
So culture is such a broad topic. Of all the aspects of culture, which ones are those that you're most interested in?
Gosh, so many things. I'm a huge believer in strong cultural foundations. I'm a real believer that companies need to have really strong purpose, really strong values, and that everyone needs to be aligned with that. It to be really authentic. But for the purpose of today, there's a couple of things that have been kind of on my mind recently with everything that we're living through. And the first is resilience, this idea of resilience. It's talked about so much at the moment. We're living through a pandemic, and resilience is a key skill that we kind of all need to have at the moment. And I think there's a bit of confusion potentially around what it is. So resilience is one thing. The other thing is what I would call people leadership. So you might call people management, but I like to call it leadership, and the incredibly important, if not tremendously important role that I think people leaders play, particularly at the moment, but all the time. So those two things, I don't know, we could start with one.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, resilience is talked about a lot, particularly nowadays, how important it is to be resilient. So how do you describe what resilience to be?
So first of all, I would say it's really important to know that it's a skill that you can learn and you can develop. I think lots of people think that resilience can sometimes be something that you're born with. You've either got it or you haven't got it. And actually, it's a skill and a mindset that you really can learn. So everybody can have it and get a lot better at it. The other thing that I think we tend to think about is that it's all about this ability to kind of bounce back from setbacks, which, yes, it is. In my opinion, but it's more than that as well, because I think we get this idea when we're talking about bouncing back from setbacks that it's all it's just about grin and bear it, carry on, gotta get on with it, and okay in the face of adversity. And actually, it's much more about understanding your emotions to begin with, understanding how you feel, accepting that, kind of leaning into the emotion and the anxiety. And being really, really self-aware, and then putting in place the things you need to do that will make you more resilient. Once you know what your kind of triggers and your emotional kind of triggers are. So it's much more than just coming back from setbacks. But it is about that, and it's about leaning into your emotions and understanding them. So self-awareness becomes so very, very important. That's kind of how I would define it. I think there's some really key things that you can do to build your resilience as well, which are things you cannot have you cannot have really great resilience unless you've got very, very strong physical foundations. You need to be fit and healthy. So self-care is the first and foremost thing. So, you know, looking after yourself, making sure that you're eating the right food, that you're hydrating, that you're getting enough sleep, all those simple things, you're getting enough rest and relaxation, your workspace is set up in the right way. All of those things have to be right to begin with, so that you've got your physical foundations to then start building from. And then you can start managing your emotions and there's a phrase that's coming into my mind now, which is controllables, which is used in sporting contexts. But essentially that means accept the conditions that you're operating in, and don't try and control the things that are outside of your control. Focus on the things that are in your control. There's always something that's within your control, even though there might be a lot that feels outside of your control. So that feels really, really important, and choosing your mindset in that situation around the situation that you're in. Does that kind of make sense as a starter?
It is. So I'm trying to, as you describe it, a kind of metaphor comes to mind. I don't think it's perfect, but just if I say some of what I am understanding. So
yeah.
To be resilient to something, that means something might happen. First of all, are you resilient to something? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So something happens so something happens to me. So the art or the skill of being resilient is, even before that thing happens to me, I need to consider, okay, well, what is my mindset about things? How am I in terms of my emotions and how I respond to things? How's my health, I guess, physically, psychologically, and other aspects of health? So there's that. So I need to understand that and put that, like, try and develop that in as healthier place, so that when inevitably something happens, I am able to. And what exactly is being resilient? Is it so when it happens, I respond in the best way I can, or is it not about like my ability to respond? Is it, yeah? So what is that bit of resilience? Yeah. So when something happens, then what?
So I think what you were saying then is 100% right about, we can't wait for things to happen to us. So people that are, and teams, because often we don't do resilience on our own, we do it together, and we support each other, and teams can work on resilience. But when we are being resilient, we are planning for the future. Absolutely. So we are, we're not waiting for things to happen to us. We're thinking about the things that we might need to be resilient for in the future. And then we're preparing ourselves to be ready with the things that we know will help us for our individual selves. And that's slightly different for everybody. There's some commonalities there. But so if you like, we're building our own resilience recipe. So we know that when something happens in the future, we're not going to react in the moment. We're going to be able to respond based on a planned approach to it. Does that answer what I?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, where my mind goes is, okay, so once that happens, then if I've become more resilient, what's different in my behavior? Is it that I'm more considered in my approach, and/or is it that I get less negatively affected by what happens?
I think you're really aware of your emotions. So you're aware what you are feeling and when you are feeling it, and you're able to name it and almost let it flow through you, because that's what happens when we do that with emotions. They will flow through us. So we're aware how we're feeling, and we sit with it for a moment, and then it flows through. And then there are other things that we can do, like getting up and being active is helpful with emotions. being of service to other people. So focusing on how can I support other people in this situation. So being of service is a great way to be resilient. Not focusing on what's going wrong for me, but actually being of service to other people. And thinking, having the mindset of thinking about what you do have, not what you don't have. And almost seeing that as a learning opportunity. Okay, so this situation, whatever it is a tough situation, but actually here's an opportunity for me to learn and focus on the things that I do have. Yeah.
Something that comes to mind is, I don't know if is it one part of resilience, is I heard a coach say to me, this was fitness related, but they said, like, if this was your best friend going through it, what would you say to them? Like, how would you encourage them so that you are being your best friend? So would that be part of being resilient? Like, kind of telling yourself or supporting yourself in the same way you'd support a best friend?
Yes, absolutely. It's being, it's that idea of being a great coach to yourself. And that's all part of you, learning your recipe and then putting that recipe for resilience into action and being a great coach to yourself, being that great friend. Absolutely.
Okay. I feel more aware of what resilience is and things I can do to be more resilient. If we move on now, I kind of don't want to. I want to go deep, but we will move on because I do want to talk about the other one. So share more about, you were saying, people leadership. Yeah, leadership of people management, the differentiation.
Yeah, so that's just the other thing, I guess, on my mind at the moment. And yeah, I feel that people, and again, by that I mean anybody who has responsibility for managing other people, have such an important role to play at the moment and all the time. But I think it's particularly highlighted at the moment with the ways that we're working and COVID, etc. They're that line into the person. I mean, your most most important relationship at work is with your boss, actually, and kind of can make or break you. And we've all probably been in the situations where we have been either made or broken by it. But
almost, if we weren't so resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. But it goes back to so many people get put, I believe, into a people leadership role, because they're technically good at their job. And that does not mean that they are going to be a great people leader. And often they're not. If they're technically very good at their job, then sometimes the sort of skill set and behaviors that they have doesn't actually lend themselves to great people leadership, which is the first thing. And so I think there needs to be much more of a focus on, does this person want to be a people leader, or is it just because they're the best at X, Y, and Z? Because you've got to want to do it, because it's a really big and important role. So that's one thing that's kind of really on my mind. And then it's about getting them to move away from managing and controlling things, as that management aspect, to much more leading people. And in the main, people leaders or managers out there have had no training, or is often the case that they've had little to no training to be a great people leader. So why would they know how to do it? And so they tend to do what comes most naturally, which is to manage and control tasks. And actually it kind of it makes the people that they're leading become a little bit helpless, because they're being controlled so deeply. And actually we want people to be self-leaders, and we want everybody to be in control of their own destiny, their own career, their own development. But we want a great people leader to support them in that journey and to be brilliant at bringing that out of them. But every individual has to be in control of their own performance and development. So that feels important to me.
So if you're a people manager and you're aware that you're early in your journey to development,
Mm-hmm.
what advice or guidance would you offer them?
Oh, good question. So
Where should someone start?
I think they start first and foremost with, do they want to do this? You know, do they kind of have an idea of what it's about? And if not, let's share that with them, and ensure that they understand what is expected of them in that role, and what that looks like. So first and foremost, do you really want this? Is it playing to your strengths? Is this right for you? And get them, to think about that. And then, I mean, it's hard to say it with regard to an individual, because they often maybe don't have the budget to go and get training themselves, or decide. But I think that having some guidance in what great people leadership looks like is really, really important. So that's more advice to companies, I think, than it is perhaps to an individual. But certainly, if there isn't any budget available for some for some support there, then they could go find a mentor, someone that they've worked with in the past that's been a brilliant manager. Maybe they had their best boss. Contact them and ask to if they would mentor them or spend a bit of time with them at least. And I think that's actually another good way of thinking about it. What was a great boss to me? Like, what's the best boss I've ever had, and what made it so great? What made me feel so good about that boss, and what made that relationship really good? And then try and emulate that.
Yeah, and you saying that makes me. I went on a little journey. I was like, okay, so if someone hasn't had a manager before, then what happens? And then what they could do is they could ask their current manager. Oh, well, it's not often that would happen. So someone who's new to a manager wouldn't have had a manager before. It might happen. But anyway, what they could do is they could ask their manager, they could ask them that same question, like, tell me about your favorite manager, because then you'll get an understanding of what that manager really values. And then you can get a sense of, okay, do I value that as well? Is that something I want to develop, or do I want to develop something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've always got the problem that maybe that wasn't the best relationship. If they've had a manager that. So I think there are examples though to look. We have access to so much information and people, and there's a way to find somebody who is great at that role, and that's one of the best ways to learn that stuff is from other people. Equally, though, there's something in my mind here about sometimes we learn the most when we learn what not to do, actually. So, maybe we've had a really bad manager before, and, what is it about that experience that made it really bad? And and actually it gives us switch it on its head. It gives us what we should be doing. That makes sense.
Yeah, when companies when teams of people work on team values or beliefs, I know some teams, they like to do, here's what we value, and here's what good looks like, or here are the behaviors we want to encourage, and then some also have, here's the things we don't, so they explicitly write the undesired. So it's kind of similar, but from a management perspective.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we touched on those two topics of resilience and people leadership. Now, if we just do a couple more questions. Given everything that's been going on in the world, and in our conversation about resilience, how we mentioned how important well-being is. Could you share some of the things you've been doing for your own well-being?
Yeah, sure. So my experience has been quite up and down, I'll be really honest, from this whole pandemic, as I suspect everybody's has been to some degree, but so a lot of my work got put on hold, and so that it's difficult from a I'm not earning as much money point of view, but to be honest, it's more difficult from a feeling of a lack of purpose in what you're doing. So that's felt, you know, a little bit difficult. Thankfully, it's come back now, and so touch wood, all is good. But so I lost my mojo a little bit. I'll be honest with you. I also live on my own, and so I'm single, and that, you know, that whole thing, particularly in the first lockdown when you were, you know, really couldn't see anybody else, it felt a little bit different to the one that we're in now, I think, and I can now bubble up with someone. But so it made me sort of examine, you know, was it a good thing to be single? It kind of makes you question everything. So and then I had some guilt. I had some guilt around, gosh, there's so many people in a worse situation than me. So I had lots of emotions, and you know, I did lose my mojo a little bit. In terms of wellbeing tips, I know what I did. So I have a dog, and she is, as you know, Matt, she is very, very important to me. But she was brilliant, like great company. But, you know, it meant that I had to go out walking every day. And, you know, for me, that is just so important. So important. Getting out, exercise, fresh air, you know, super, super important. Friends and family, you know, connecting on Zoom. It was, you know, to begin with, through particularly the first lockdown. But I did actually learn to do a bit of that stuff in resilience. I really, you know, because it's quite often hard to take your own medicine. You kind of tell everybody else to do it, and then you forget to do it yourself. But I did kind of lean into my emotions, and I did go, it's okay not to be okay all the time. You know, it's, you know, I'm just going to sit with this, not feeling quite right. And I did focus on what's in my control. So, you know, there was lots of stuff that was outside of my control, but there was lots that I could do that was in my control. And I did start to do that stuff and focus on doing it. And I reminded myself of my purpose in the work that I do, like why I do what I do. And I got excited about it again. And I guess those are kind of, yeah, the main things I did. But yeah, it's not been easy, as I'm sure it hasn't been for lots of people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I find kind of when I'm finding things challenging, I also find it helpful to focus on the why. That's what I get coached on doing. They're like, okay, but remind yourself why you're doing it, why you're doing it, and that will often help.
100%. Yeah, really, really important. And again, you can be that self-coach to yourself to do that. Like you can have a coach as well, which is brilliant if you can. But you can sort of, you know, remind yourself to do that, you know, beginning, end of the week. But, you know, why am I doing what I'm doing? And just checking in with your purpose, that you're, you know, that you're really focusing on the right stuff.
And then for our last one today, earlier on we talked about management and advice for managers. Now, if we think more broadly, if someone, they may not be a manager, if just someone's working and they're to influence their company's culture, what advice would you offer to them?
Yes. So I think it's okay to start small and just get going and start sort of trialing a few things and try and find some like-minded people to join in and start it off quite small and just do stuff, just have a go at it. I think experimentation is absolutely key. There's never ever going to be a right way of doing it. I mean, literally, and every company will have a slightly different approach. And what works in one won't necessarily work in another, and vice versa. So I think get a group of people, you know, that are like-minded and believe in the same stuff, and start experimenting and start seeing what works. At some stage, you are going to have to involve leaders, because they are so important. But it's almost easier if you've got something going already. So I think, you know, yeah, you're going to need to involve the leaders at some stage, but start small and experiment. And at the end of the day, it's a it's a process, not an event. Like it never ends. And so be in it for the long haul and celebrate the little wins along the way.
As you're saying that, they are definitely things that I can relate to my own journey in influencing culture. So thank you for sharing those. Okay, this has been, I've really appreciated the opportunity to learn more about these topics. Thank you for sharing your experience, also sharing your journey, how it's been for you. With that, I would say, thank you very much, Jo. And then I'll see everyone tomorrow, same time.
Thank you, Matt.
Jo.
Cheers. Bye-bye.